Welcome back, everybody. This is the James Dixon Podcast. I am your host, James David Dixon. As always, we're here for a good time, not a long time. Proverbs 18:21 tells us that life and death is in the power of the tongue, which is to say the words we use matter. The words we use either take us closer to our goals or move us further away from our goals. And so I've been thinking about this idea of reframing, and so much of what I do on this podcast with the Make Politics Local Again tour is getting people to reframe their reality in a way that takes you from I'm powerless and things are happening to me to I'm powerful and can change the reality that I'm subject to. And so everything we do is to try to give you more power and to use the power of language on your behalf. So the other day, I asked one of my good friends on X, Doc Hypnosis, to join me on a space. And together we did the Great Reframe Challenge. We talked about some of the reframes that we've done that have worked. Doc has some great reframes on the trans issue. Call them transvestites rather than transgender. And it makes it clear that these are just people who dress weird because they didn't change their sex, because you can't change your sex. With me, it's calling 2026 election in Michigan a must win rather than a midterm. And so Doc Hypnosis is brilliant when it comes to persuasion. He's brilliant in many ways. This is a recording of the session we did the other night on X. So sit back, relax. This is a lot longer than my normal podcast would be, but I think you'll find quite a bit of value. One last thing I'll say, the cool thing about doing an X space is you get feedback in real time. And so not only did Doc Hypnosis and I talk about some reframes that we've done that are good and have worked, but we also let people ask questions and present reframe challenges to us, which we would take on in real time. So that was a fun exercise. But when you hear this, if you think of a reframe challenge, tell me, present it, say something in the comments, and we'll be sure to take it on the next one. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is part one of the Great Reframe Challenge of 2026. I appreciate you guys coming out. I'll just get started early. Bowtied Trance, Dr. Hypnosis is going to be joining us very soon. But yeah, so the whole point of this exercise, the whole point of what we're going to talk about this hour is this idea that if you're not reframing, here's my guy, here's Doc Hypnosis, he's here right now. Is this idea that if you're not reframing, you're not trying. If you're not actively bending the world that is into the world you want to be, you won't succeed. You won't be happy. You'll be stuck with whatever cards the world deals, which in my experience are pretty bad hands. And so it is our job to tilt the playing field. So you were born into an unfair world that in many cases is not stacked to our favor in any way, right? And it is our job to find our unfair advantages, whether God has given those to us or we've developed them ourselves, or some mix of the two. Not that God wouldn't have a role in it, but it's our job to tilt the world in the way we want it to go, not just to accept the world that is. And so reframing, the Bible says that life and death is in the power of the tongue. And so to reframe reality is to recast reality. And the way we do it, the way me and Doc Hypnosis are going to do it, it's done in a way that is meant to and will result in empowering you, right? We're getting you out of a framework that is disempowering and showing you how much power, how much influence you have if. And if is the magic word in this whole thing. So, Doc Hypnosis, I see you're in the room. Love to hear your voice as we're getting started.
Good evening, Mr. Dixon. How are you?
Good evening, sir. Great to hear your voice.
Thank you. Just checking all the tech and make sure we've got the right settings, and it sounds like everything's working just fine. I've been looking forward to this since you so wonderfully suggested it last week. What if we just go do a reframe challenge, share some reframes with people, and then let them kind of throw some stuff at us and try and reframe on the spot? And I love the way you're introducing this. Way to cross it over with scripture too, the power of the words. Words, single words, lots of words, the way we think about things. And so the way this kind of works is The words are how we relate to the world around us. And I'm looking at my desk and there's a bottle of water. Those are the words that I have to use to describe what that thing is. This is how I interact. And the words, they end up creating a feeling. Words create feelings. The feelings create opinions. The opinions create actions. Actions create the outcomes. And so you're talking about, maybe I got dealt a bad hand or a hand I'd rather not work with. Maybe we're just thinking about it wrong. Maybe we need some different words to create a different feeling about that situation. And suddenly you're going about it differently. You're feeling better about it, which means you're going to act differently. Pretty soon, before you know it, you're like, wow, I just changed the entire reality in front of me, starting with changing the words.
And that's exactly it. That is biblical. As a man think and as we speak is how we are. And when you think about, like, I think about one of my favorite stories in the Bible, the Tower of Babel story. What was God's curse to the people building the tower? He confused their language. And so ever since that happened, we've been on a, several thousand-year goose chase to try to put the pieces of the egg, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And if you're trying to win the influence battle and move the world, so let me just back up for a second and talk about what we're all trying to do. If you're the kind of person who goes to this kind of space, we're all trying to influence people, right? And the heart of what we're trying to do is to move other people, but first ourselves, from point A that's not working to point B that's much more effective, much more empowered. And so an example I would use, so I just did a podcast, James Dixon podcast. You should check it out. Just did a podcast about a woman in Oakland County, Michigan, where I live. And this woman donates to Democrats, spends time with Democrats. But when I see her at Republican meetings, she's there to gather our signatures. So she's there to basically siphon off our resources. I'm there to build up the party. She's there to build up the Democrat Party. We're literally pulling at opposite ends, uh, and directly opposed ends. And and so on one hand, you could say, man, that shows how much more committed Democrats are and how far behind we are. But the way I choose to reframe that story is there's not that many people like her. Democrats are maxed out. Think about all the cultural levers they've had to pull over all these decades to get people to that point where they think blue no matter who, where they think every election is life and death, where they understand the importance of voting the political calendar. And so they're the ones unhappy, and they've gone to great lengths to make people so unhappy as to vote reliably Democrat. We have the White House, and the Senate, and we're barely getting started. So I don't look at the scoreboard and say, man, they're up. What are we going to do? I look at it and say, we have a whole lot of upside because we have not yet begun to fight. What say you, Doc?
I mean, I love it. Why not call it? It's all upside because you don't know where the top is, right? You don't know where the ceiling is. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's all upside. I don't care what topic we're talking about, it's all upside. And you talk about, sometimes you make a mistake here or there. And so, it's like I don't fail, I learn.
Right.
I don't center on failures. I look at that as tuition, and just kind of paying my way and learning my way towards bigger and better things. So yeah, absolutely. Just it's I've written about this in my book Demonetize Your Mind. I got a couple different chapters in there about the power of one word persuasion, the power of reframe, especially in the context of like political campaigns and the way we interact with people in the world of politics. And just it's incredible how easy it is to just comedians do this very well, by the way. Comedians are like the ultimate reframers.
Oh, yeah.
And I talk about Norm Macdonald in my book, and in the we are recording this, so someone's going to clip this and make me sound bad, but that's okay. What the example that I use is that you'd never in a million years, none of us could get away with standing in a room with 500 people and saying the words "I love Hitler." You'd be in serious trouble for that. But Norm Macdonald did it and had them all laughing, falling out of their seats, laughing. All he did though was he reframed it. It's no longer a guy on stage saying this; it's Hitler's dog. So suddenly you've got the frame of, oh, everybody loves a dog. Dogs love everybody. And suddenly it's okay that he's got this dog jumping around going, woof, woof, I love Hitler. And think about that. That's just a reframe. That's just, you're changing the context so radically that, like, I don't think about this in the normal way anymore. And now you have 500 people in a room laughing at a phrase that would shock most people.
Yeah, I just heard another example of that. This big black guy comedian was telling a joke, and he was saying, he got on the elevator with an old white lady, and she starts grabbing her purse, and that made him feel uncomfortable. And so next thing you know, she's grabbing her purse, he's grabbing her purse, she's grabbing the purse. And so you think he's gonna take it in that douchey direction of like, oh, this white lady was racist to me. And the joke is I actually was trying to steal the lady's purse. And so it's these reframe that is really the heart of humor. And humor is ultimately a subversive act in that way. You're
Hmm.
subverting what is and creating this alternate world where you could laugh at I love Hitler. You could laugh at the guy stealing an old lady's purse. Some perverse things can be made funny in context.
Hmm. Yeah, and sometimes we think of our lives as a perverse thing, right? You said if it's going downhill or whatever. And I love the quote from Richard Bandler who said, we have that saying, they say someday you're going to look back at this and laugh. And I say, why wait?
Mm.
Let's do it now. If we're going to look back on it and laugh someday, what are we waiting for? Let's do it right now. Just change the context, look at it a different way. It's actually an exercise that he recommends in one of his books that's on the subject of reframing, and says use the comedian challenge. If you look at a situation in your life, and then sort of say, if a comedian were describing this scenario, what would the comedian say? Like, how would they turn this into
Oh.
something that would make an audience laugh? And if you could do that with your own life, you're so far ahead of the game. Totally unfair advantage.
And so, what brought this together is that Doc and I collaborated on what I am calling actually, someone told me this. I'm repeating what someone told me. So I'm not saying it's the mother of all reframes. I've been told it's the mother of all reframes. And it's this idea that 2026 is a must win election in Michigan and not what everyone in the media is going to call it, what even a lot of politicos on Twitter call it every single day, which is a midterm. And what I find, so a few things about that, right? So in Michigan, we're a state that reelects the incumbent. So anyone who gets 4 years is going to get 8 years as governor. You're going to get both terms. It's extremely rare that you wouldn't get it, right? So if you're in for 4, you're in for 8. Um, and also, like when you look at like the entire Michigan House, the entire Michigan Senate, all these seats that are available, fundamentally, what we have in November is a Lansing-based election. But midterm is a word that makes it sound like all of life, all of American politics revolves around Donald Trump. Okay, so another thing that we do in Michigan is we also tend to trade the governor's office when the Democrat's term is up, a Republican gets elected. When a Republican is up, then we flip back to Democrat. We have a Democrat now, which means we're up. So to say it's a midterm is to lean into a history where, and this number is going to blow your mind. So since 1946, we've had 20 of these midterms. The president's party has lost 18 of them. So Doc, said it perfectly. Why do I want to use a word that's associated with a 90% failure rate? Whereas if we understand that this is a must win, A, and B, history says that we're due for a win. Now that's a very different circumstance. There could be a one state anomaly. And these people who are talking about it as a midterm, man, as you think, so it will be. You could midterm yourself into losing your state forever, into becoming a California situation. So given that we haven't tipped all the way over, it's extremely important to understand that A, we can win, and B, we have to win. Doc, could you tell me how you
Yeah.
arrived at must win? Because we were trying to look for an alternative term to midterm, and you found the
Mhm.
perfect one.
Right, and so that's part of the technique. I say anytime that you can connect to the original framing and make it sound a little bit like the original framing, it's so much easier for the audience's brain to just go, "Zoop, that makes sense." If it's too different from the original branding, it feels like a disconnect in your mind, and you have to kind of get used to the new term. And as I said earlier, the whole purpose in a reframe is to change the way I feel about something. Well, I don't feel anything about the word midterm. That doesn't sound like that's a nothing word. Um,
It's not the final, right? So it downgrades the importance.
yeah, yeah. So that's you're almost framing that like a school test, right?
Yeah.
But it's midterm. What's that? I don't feel anything. When you say that's a must win, oh, I felt that. That sounds urgent. That sounds like something I will get up, off my couch and go do. And so I was just wanting to connect it. The way that we can connect to the original framing on some things is to use rhyme, to use alliteration, something that sort of sounds like that word. So in your case, it was you were saying midterm, and I went, okay, what starts with an M that communicates this idea? That's also a hyphenated word, kind of a thing, and just came, well, that's must win. So at least you've got that little bit of alliteration going on, and it's easier for the brain to process that.
Right. And I just thought this was an incredible point B to move us to. So, I think about with each reframe, what's the moral of the reframe, right? And so to me, which is to say, what's the point B we're trying to move people to or move ourselves to? Point A, it's a midterm election, which means you better sit home and wait to lose. And then when you lose, and then when Trump's team gets indicted, and then when he's impeached, we can all act shocked. Oh my God, it was a midterm. The president's party always loses midterms. I stayed home and we lost. What an unpredictable turn of events. And so when you hear that, that's disempowering. And when you factor in how the Republican voter shows up and does not show up, which is to say they show up sometimes for presidential races, but they typically sit out your Februarys, your Mays, your August, and your non-presidential years. Um, when you factor in the patterns of the Republican voter, I could argue midterm is a term used to condition you to not vote. And that's certainly what the media means is that A, you'll lose, and B, since the presidency's not on it, since Sean Hannity's not going to be talking about it tonight, you might as well not show up. Whereas point B, when we say it's a must win, is not only do we have a chance to save our state, in Michigan, this is our last chance. Because if we were to have two Democrats in a row for the first time in history, we would pretty much lose the state. And so we're trying to get you from an election that I don't care about because Donald Trump's not on the ballot, as he never will be again, to I have a chance to save my state. And if I stay home, it could all slip away.
Yeah, and it's not just Michigan either. Like you were saying, our state in particular. I'm a Michigan resident as well. For those who don't know, uh, yeah, our state is definitely in a precarious position. We've got to turn some things around quickly because we're becoming as I say, we're becoming the Minnesota of California's very quickly. But it's not like the rest of the country is not in the same situation where, as you said, if somehow we lose the House, God forbid, the House and the Senate, it's nothing but impeachments and problems and more obstruction all the way up and down. So this is not midterms for anybody. This is must wins across the board. And I think if you create that frame and you spread that frame and you create that sensation, the feeling for the voters, there's a real good chance that we just kind of take this whole thing down in a landslide. And that's the other things. I won't talk about we're going to get our butts kicked or whatever. Anybody that's talking that way, oh, that's it. Trump made this decision. That's it. MAGA's dead. We're
Right.
going to lose it. Take that toxicity out of here because the power in the words is that it creates the reality around you. And if everyone's thinking it's a lost cause or whatever, man, you're not helping anything. You're not helping anyone. So I'm saying This is going to be a landslide like you've never seen before. It's going to go so red, that we're going to get all inspired and see that, like you said earlier, we haven't begun to fight. We haven't begun to win. So you just keep that, that fixation, that focus.
And that's exactly it. And so, with in this case, you have a group of people who are disempowered and don't feel like they can win. They feel like everything's rigged against them. And now you're giving them power. Now you're giving them arguments to use. Now you're giving them a path forward where we understand, we can win, and B, we have a role in that. Like, the 10 million of us who live here currently are going to have to save Michigan or it won't be saved. And so just that understanding that this is our last chance, that this is a must-win situation. Um, and it's one of those things I'd love for people to say, "Oh, that wasn't true because we won and Michigan was saved." I'd love to argue these things in 2028 and the safety of a state that's not failing. But in reality, if we do fail, we probably are gonna have to look for a plan B, and so I don't wanna do that, um, and that's why we're gonna work our butt off. I'm working with Americans for Prosperity. We're knocking doors. We're trying to hit 1.5 million doors this year. I see in the one of our listeners, Patriot Post girl, Heather Dow, one of my best friends, she's making calls like nobody has ever seen. Making cold calls, calling people that she does not know, trying to get them to move them to a point B that would make Michigan a better place. These are not things people do when they feel powerless. And so the reason we are reframing is to retain and grow our power. It's not good enough to say, "Oh, I'm demoralized." They want you to be demoralized. They go out of their way. They line the news print, the news that runs on TV, the news that's on your phone is all designed to make you tap out. And so we're not going to. We're going to do the harder thing, the more interesting thing, and we're going to keep showing up. Um, Doc, I hate to put
Yeah,
you on the
that's.
spot.
Oh, I was just going to chime
Oh,
in there
please
because
do.
as you're
Please
talking
do.
about, Heather's out there making the phone calls. You're making the rounds here in Michigan. I got other people that message me or reply to my post and say, "Yeah, I went and voted in the Texas primary today," or "I'm doing this," or "I'm doing that." And one of the short little reframes that I've been, trying to get some traction on, you may have seen it, is that we need doers, not doomers.
Yes.
And that's just a nice, tight little alliterative, that'll stick. You remember it, but that's kind of the idea. Is we need doers, not doomers, because here's another reframe that I'm kind of working, putting some spit and polish on this one. But the whole idea that I am passive, that life happens to me, that I can't make a difference in politics, because it just goes this way. We're 90% dogs in this or whatever,
Right.
is that victimization mindset that I say, who else thinks like that? Communists.
Mm,
Communism is built on the victim mentality that, hey, you can't change anything, your life sucks, and that's how they get you to hand over all the power. Like, we'll take care of it for you. It's not your fault. It's the rich, or it's the whatever. It's the men. It's the patriarchy. They'll find a
right.
target to blame, but it lives and thrives on the mentality that I can't do anything about my situation, so I got to give that to somebody else. And that's what I see when I hear the doomer talk. Like, well, it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. You can't vote hard enough to fix this. Like, so we're in line with the communists then.
Right.
Well, nobody wants that. Nobody on our side wants that. You start using that emotionally loaded term, and watch how fast people start to rethink and go, wait a minute, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm not a victim. I'm not passive. I'm not going to sit around and do nothing. I'm going to be a doer and not a doomer.
Mm. And that's the kind of person we're gonna need, is the person who doesn't say, "Man, I was watching TV the other night and I saw 10 guys who left their families that night and they knock on doors during the day and they walk away from their jobs and other income they could have made, and they tried to run for office to help out, to help save Michigan, whether they're right or wrong, whether I like them or not." And I decided none of those guys were entertaining enough for me. That's so weak. That's so weak as a mentality because it assumes that life is a TV show. And what we need to all do is get out of the consumption based mindset of, is the TV show entertaining enough for me? And saying, what is my role in building the world I want? And it's much tougher to think in the abstract about, like, you know, I mean, we came to the brink in 2024 where it felt like we could actually lose America. But losing our state, I think people feel vividly. People feel that in their bones, likely because it has already started. And so, just to get people to see what power they have, that's why we had to reframe it this way. Um, and Doc, I'd like to ask you, you had some other great reframes. The trans issue has been a thorn in many sides for a long time now. You've had some reframes on that. Could you share those?
I will happily share those because I'll die on that hill. The power of words, as I said, to create. So I say this in my book, Demonetize Your Mind, that words either reaffirm or recreate reality.
Mm,
Reaffirm or recreate. It's going
right.
to be one of those two things. All the words that we use are either reaffirming the reality we're in or they're recreating it. And it's mystifying to me that we oftentimes let the very leftist academic and media world hand us our vocabulary. And we go, oh, thank you very much. We'll just use that vocabulary from here on out. But they program their vocabulary. And the power of persuasion and hypnosis is that if you repeat a thing enough times, it is rewiring your brain. And so I tackled that, targeted that one word in particular, transgender, and said that's a non-reality word.
Mm,
You jam two words together, one that means to change, and one that is gender, and you cram it together, and now it's one reality changing word that you go around repeating, going transgender, transgender. You're rewiring your brain slowly to accept by default that gender is something that can be transitioned, can be transed, as I say. And so, how earlier I was saying, in a reframe, it really helps if you can hook into the original frame and not disrupt someone's brain patterns. Just kind of make it zoop. I change part of it, and so thankfully, we already had a word for this, and it's the word transvestite. And the word vestite is from a Latin word for clothes. So the word transvestite literally just means you changed your clothes. And I go, that is the reality word. So I'm not going to say the fake word that recreates a different set of reality.
mm,
Transgender, it's transvestite. And before anybody, I know because I get this every time I say those two things together, somebody will want to go, well, I don't call them transvestites. I just call them fill in the blank. I call them the mentally ill. So, well, that's an insult. It's not a reframe.
right.
Maybe it's a clever insult, but that's not going to help rewire a brain because we want to keep the hook. Both words start with trans, right? So it's that hook into the original frame that lets you kind of manipulate the rest of the frame as you go. So transvestite is one of them. You and I had talked about the slogan pro life, right? How that's like it's a very sort of ambiguous word, pro life. Well, what's life? And the left has been kicking our butts on that ever since because then they go, well, but you support the death penalty.
Oh yeah.
You
Oh yeah.
you support war efforts or whatever. Like you're killing people. I mean, so I thought you were pro life, and so it turns out, James, I'm not pro life. I'm decidedly not pro life. I am pro baby,
Mm,
and baby is a very visceral word. Now it's a visual word. I can see, that image in my mind, and it just kind of eliminates all the distractions around it. Again, it's pointed, it's visual, it makes you feel something. I'm pro baby, and I support the rights of the preborn, not the unborn,
mm,
the preborn, because pre implies this thing is going to happen on the natural timeline, on a natural process.
right.
We're just in the pre-birth state, not the unborn state, preborn. So pro baby, preborn. Um, I think one of the other ones that I've been kind of toying with, it's not as like crucial, but it illustrates, the effectiveness of a reframe to get your message across. And that's the word ultra processed.
Mm.
So you see a lot of that in the Maha movement, and I agree with all of it. I'm like, I want to know more about this. Stop eating ultra processed foods because you get cancer and it's inflammation and it's you gain weight and all this. And I honestly, not joking, I used to think like ultra processed just meant that it went through extra steps, in the processing plant, like a ham at a deli counter. Like, well, did it go through a lot of processing to get here? I had to look up the term some years ago. Okay, what is ultra processed? And I read the definition. I'm like, oh, it's chemically altered. I get it now. Like, and that's such a more visceral, set of terms. And I guarantee you, if the Maha crowd, which I'm on your side, by the way, if the Maha crowd would consistently say chemically altered foods, that would generate a much more visceral reaction. That would generate an understanding. Like, oh, I know what you're talking about now. You're talking about Doritos because that's all chemically engineered stuff, or that's cereals. It's you see it, you feel it, and it's much easier to kind of follow out the result in the end just by changing a couple of words around.
And it's funny you say that because the one my mind goes to is genetically modified, which was such a horrific phrase that they pretty much tell you up front this stuff is not genetically modified. Like that phrase became so distasteful. I don't even know if the law is what changed or if the phrase turned people off to the point where food manufacturers had to tell you we didn't genetically modify this.
So if it sounds like a science experiment, you're probably not going to eat it,
And
right?
that's exactly it. And so I think so and so again, right? The moral of the reframe. In the case of must win instead of midterm, the point B is empowerment. In the case with transvestite, with pro baby, well not pro baby because that's a little bit of a different point B. Um, But in the case of chemically altered, in the case of transvestite, what you're trying to do with the reframe, and tell me what you think about my read. Essentially, you're trying to create an ick factor.
Well, ultimately, the point B is I want to change your behavior. So whatever that behavior is, we're talking. And so in the election context, if I say it's must win, it's because I want to change your behavior to get off the couch and go vote.
Right.
If I say it's pro baby, I want to change the way you think and therefore treat the issue. Your behavior around that issue will start with understanding that it's very specific to the baby, to the preborn. Transvestite, I want you to think differently about this and not become numb to the concept that, well,
Right.
yeah, you could sort of modify gender in some ways, because that'll be the next thing. It'll be the soft sell that you're like, oh, okay, maybe in some cases. No, I want you to think differently about it. Therefore, when you encounter a non-reality phrase like transgender or a word like that, that doesn't even sound real.
Right.
So I'm thinking about it differently, and I'm going to, respond to that scenario differently. So it's all about changing the behavior in the end.
And so right there, right? So when they get you to use a word that's not real, when they confuse your language, they've pulled you into the world of unreality now. Now you'll say anything.
Yeah.
Because you've just told them that what you say and don't say is based on the social climate. It's based on what you've been told is acceptable to say. And so every time you give in to unreality and every time these reframes work on you and you're moved to a point B you don't like, you're now part of the problem. You've been enlisted into the problem. And I think the power of that phrase transgender is it makes it sound like there's a nobility to it. Like these people just made a conscious choice and we should all respect that choice. Whereas transvestite puts it more into the category of you just dress weird.
You didn't change anything but
You
your
didn't change
clothes.
anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had somebody reply to me on some weeks ago when because I keep pushing this one. Every couple of days, I'll kind of go back to, hey, remember transvestite? And somebody had said something. They might have been joking, but they made the comment about, well, except if they go through with the surgery. And I won't be as graphic as this person was, but you get the idea. A man decides to go ahead and have an alteration, get some things chopped off. And I said, that doesn't make him a transgender. That just makes him a transvestite without a fill in the blank.
Right.
So like you still haven't changed anything except the clothes. And you're talking about or I thought of it when you were talking about genetically modified, because they eventually just put an acronym over that, right?
GMO.
And that's the like sort of the final step in the process. And George Carlin has a great bit that I quote in Demonetize Your Mind, where he talks about the softening of the language until it disappears behind an acronym and it no longer means anything because
Oh.
it's just letters now. And so he was talking about what happens to a soldier when they go off to war and they experience the trauma of war. Well, way back in World War II, they used to call that shell shock.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it even sounds like the guns, shell shock, shell shock. And that it eventually became battle fatigue. Oh, it's a little
A little
fatigue.
tired.
It's a little
Yeah.
tired. And then that just became post traumatic stress, right? Like
PTSD.
PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Well, that's like a ton of extra words. It's kind of a little confusing. Like, what are we talking about? Post traumatic stress disorder, and then they just kind of hit it behind the acronym PTSD. And now you've reached the final stage where today people will throw around that acronym to talk about I had a bad experience at Burger King. Like, oh, I can't go back to Burger King. I've got some PTSD from the last time I ate there. Like, you're
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
shell shock.
And that's
Like,
exactly it. Shell shock makes it clear this was something that was done to these people. It
mhm.
makes it seem like these people need to be protected from what was ever done, right? Like they risked it. They came out shell shocked, and now it's our turn to have their back. PTSD is something people opt into. No one ever said they were shell shocked or wanted to be shell shocked who wasn't.
Mm. Yeah, you change the directionality of that whole thing, and I think George Carlin's point was, maybe this is why veterans in this country don't get the attention,
Right.
that they deserve. Because if we said, "Hey, they're shell shocked," well, then they need some help. If you go, "Bad, it's PTSD."
Yeah, shell shock
So you
awakens a
see,
protective instinct in us.
mm,
Uh
mm,
PTSD, it like you said, it sounds like it's designed to minimize and to
mm,
compartmentalize. And if one of these guys kills himself, PTSD. One of them kills 30 people, PTSD.
mm. Yep, yep. And that's another one. We could just go do this all day long. You just said one of these guys killed themselves. We used to call that suicide.
Right.
I think they call it unalived now. I mean, just you watch how the language changes. It changes the uh, subject of the action.
Mm,
Somebody
yeah.
said, "Well, they died by suicide." We used to say committed
Committed.
suicide,
Committed. And
and that's not to say I know what they're doing with it. Like, oh, we don't want to victim blame or whatever. Like, no, but it's not about victim blaming, but it is an acknowledgement that this is preventable.
and my thing is, if committed doesn't apply to a successful suicide, what else could you be more committed to? The
Fair
act that
point.
killed that takes your life. I mean, that takes commitment.
And you see the same thing with what's the other one? They're no longer the homeless, right? They're the unhomed.
Or sometimes they're experiencing homelessness, without
Experiencing it.
being
Okay.
homeless, right? I mean, it's just, uh, I think we might have to do this one in a separate one. We
Yep.
have a little reframe debate going about sex versus gender. I think we're gonna do that on a separate one because what I'd like to do now,
Mhm.
you all have been so nice to take time, and we are gonna get out of here right at 8 o'clock. And so, if anyone has a situation, a thought, a scenario, we'll workshop how to reframe it in real time. So, Heather, anyone else, we would love to hear your voices now.
I have a thought.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, what about what we're seeing a lot of stuff about affordable housing lately?
Mm,
How do we reframe that to mean what we want it to mean? Which isn't Section 8 housing.
right. I would say the word I would want to be talking about is prosperity, not affordability, because the prosperous could have what's affordable and even a little bit more. But affordable to me sounds too much like a race to the bottom. And so when Republicans use that word, they're trying to sound like Democrats, at which point people think, why not just elect the Democrat? So I would talk about prosperity as opposed to affordability, because I'm trying to pull you up and elevate you, not say, oh, well, we need to have, something down in the mud for the mud people. No, we're not stuck down there. We don't have to be poor forever. So it just affordability, it does have that ick factor. So I think prosperity is a much better approach. What do you say, Doc?
So I'm trying to understand a little bit about this. We're saying that affordability is maybe aiming too low. Is that the idea? Like what, Heather? What don't you like about the term affordable housing? Let's start there because we're ultimately trying to change thought patterns
Right.
because we want to change behavior. What's the intended behavioral change?
I think affordable housing to me, I feel like it could be, I think it depends on where you live, number one. I think affordable housing in the city is different from affordable housing in a rural area. Um, because in the city, I feel like it has a context of welfare housing.
So we're like, yeah, so we are trying to move it away from the lowest possible rung kind of a thing. I mean, does it feel like it's almost saying the word cheap housing?
Yeah, I feel well. Maybe it's also a historical term.
It just feels
Does that
very
make sense?
poor coded.
I see. Poor coded. Yeah. So I don't claim to be able to do all reframes on the spot. Sometimes I need to play with words a little bit. But I'm, kind of in my head already thinking, you want to communicate the idea of dignity, right? James said prosperity. So these words that sort of indicate this is not just the lowest bottom of the barrel thing you could scrape up. It's something else, right? It's dignified housing is not maybe the term that you want, but this is why it's always good. I always say if you want to create a reframe, first of all, identify the behavioral change that you're trying to get to, the target,
Mm,
and then ransack the thesaurus. Find all the other words that like, how do I get to this exact meaning? But there's other words that have that punch.
that's good. That's good. Well, we're gonna have to workshop that one. But I do think overall we want to be talking about like the example I give, right? The year my mom was born, 1957, was the year Michigan had the most babies born. Now, how did two her and my dad came from families of 5 kids? This is Metro Detroit in the 50s. There was still, you know, all kinds of difficulties that I never had to experience personally for black people, and yet they were able to have 5 kids each. I have only one sibling, right? And so there was a prosperity that they had in the 50s, even as poor Metro Detroiters in the 50s, that we don't have right now. Uh, and I think that's the issue. I don't know that it was affordable. I think that they had opportunity. And I think our kids leave because they don't have opportunity. I think that's the word no one wants to say. We're gonna keep
Well, I
workshopping on.
just
Oh no, no, Doc.
no, go ahead. Well, you can pass the mic. I was just going to say I just went to the thesaurus and looked up affordable, and now I get what you're talking about. All the synonyms for affordable, it's like discount, low end, bargain basement, cut price. Okay, I got where we're coming from now. All right, I'm going to workshop that one.
Yeah, the affordable just sounds like something that Crazy Eddie would promise you. Anyone else? Anyone else have a reframe in mind or a situation that they'd like to hear another take on?
How about grief and loss?
I sadly have had to experience that. My mom passed away July 2023. I was still 39 back then, so she didn't even get to see me turn 40, you know? And so the best the best way I heard it explained to me is that grief is essentially the price you pay for having loved. Because everyone we love, we will lose or they will lose us. One or the other is going to happen. Someone, unless you die in a car crash together, someone's going to be missing someone at the end of the day, at the end of the life. And so I would view grief as something that I feel honored. I feel honored to have that feeling. I feel honored that I was close enough to feel that loss, to miss that loss, to have that hole in my heart. That hole in your heart is a badge of honor. And so I'm proud to have that grief. There's nothing else I'd rather be sad about.
Wow, badge of honor. I mean, that's it, right? That says the whole thing.
Mm.
Like I went through this experience, got everything out of it. It was worth it. It's the badge, and Scott Adams has that book, Reframe Your Brain, and there's a whole section actually of multiple grief reframes that are really, really good. So I'd recommend looking at that. But the one thing that he actually talked about, and shortly after he passed, I reposted the video from the show where he talked about this because it stuck with me. So that's a sign of a good reframe is if it sticks with you
Mm.
later, you're weeks later still talking about it. Is that he said, the reality is that every relationship ends badly, whether it's because you got a divorce or even if you last all the way, whatever the relationship is, someone's going to die. And so in some ways you can say they all end badly. That's not the thing I want to focus on. It's not the pessimism of like, oh yikes. What he said was, at the end of a relationship, if you can say that there are moments, memories in that relationship that were so good that I wouldn't trade any of those memories in exchange for not having to go through the grief.
Right,
Like if I could just take it away, no more grief, but also you don't get the relationship, you don't get the memories, none of
right.
that. So if there's memories that you would hold on to and like you were saying, it's almost like the price you pay. He said, then you didn't lose anything.
Mm.
It's not a loss.
Yeah. Andrew, did I see your hand up? Maybe he was giving us DAP. You know what? Maybe we will have. Oh, Shelly, I see your hand up. What's on your mind?
Well, we can go back to the affordable housing thing. I know you were trying to think of a different way to reframe it. Well, Republicans shouldn't be talking about affordable housing. What they should be talking about is restoring competition to the market by eliminating all of the regulations that make it impossible to build and fix and do all these things that we need to do because the government is just always in the way.
Right. And that is the approach I see uh, Americans for Prosperity Michigan. I see them taking it. I see Mackinac Center doing that, where and I think the trap politicians fall in is when they try to use that word because there's not one true blue Democrat who's going to feel 1 inch better about you because you use the word they like. What it does is it counter signals your voters that you're there to fight for them. And it shows that you're just a typical Republican who views himself as a junior partner. You might even be in on the psyop at that point. So I agree with you that that is the approach, and that's the approach I see people taking in the movement. I happen to disagree with it. I like some of the zoning things. I like the roadblocks because ultimately, what we've seen with the left is that they have a murderous intent. If I know that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, then I want to have local guardrails that stop them from being able to turn my neighborhood into the hood. And so we can argue about it, but as far as that approach, yeah, I think that that is how you would go about it. And that's the smart way to do it. The stupid way is to try to out Democrat the Democrats. And whenever you see that, that's just never going to work. Andrew.
Recent big topic on obviously geopolitics, but in general. And it's kind of hard if we look at the framing of Michigan because we have such a large population in the greater Metro Detroit and Dearborn Heights area. Islamophobia. How would we approach that, especially with election season coming up? But the couching of terms is not going to work for some people. And I know in history, the stronger party in control dictates how certain actors, you could say bad actors
Right.
in society, may uh, try to um, behave, if you know what I mean.
Right. So basically, you're called Islamophobic, or someone's called Islamophobic. What's the counter? I tend to, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see conservatives make is someone just did this in the pages of the Free Press. They said, "I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist." Well, we're all a little racist. And so said to say I'm not a racist, you know what I mean? It just now you're starting off your whole thing in the world of unreality, and it just colors everything else you say. So I think the problem with denying things is you end up repeating those things. I also think that there's certain accusations that are only made by certain types of people, right? So if you tell me I'm anti-trans, you tell me I'm racist, you tell me I'm sexist, you're not going to see too much of a fight because only the certain type of person would even say that, and I don't want to be seen as seriously wrestling with their ideas. So my attitude to anyone who would call me Islamophobic is call me whatever you want because I ain't answering to it. But I'm sure there's a better way to approach that. There's just certain things I just think it's not even helpful to take seriously enough to wrestle with. But what do you think, Doc?
Yeah, so I'm struggling with that one because I have a couple different ways of that's to me that doesn't strike me as necessarily a framing problem. I mean, it kind of is, but it's a little bit different in the sense that I don't want to necessarily play with the words and reframe, in that respect, because I know that that is a like racist, like sexist, misogynist, Islamophobic, xenophobic. These are conversation ending words. This is
Yes,
shut down all thought. You go on the back foot. You're on the defensive. You go, no, I'm not. I really, my best friend is whatever.
absolutely.
And so it's still within the realm of reframe because I said reframes are intended to push your emotions first, feel different about that framing, and then change the behavior. Sometimes with things like racist, sexist, misogynist, etc., I'll just own it and go over the top. I call it going over the top
Mm.
on something. So you're an Islamophobic. You go, yeah, because they're dangerous. They kill people all the time. You're like, come on, I'm not even going to argue with you on this, right? If you wanted to shift it though and like break the frame entirely, I suppose you could say Islamophobe. I'm family first. I'm safety first. I'm pro safety. I'm America first. Get it out of the realm of specifically Islam or whatever else it might be, that single issue, and say the larger high ground here is I'm again pro prosperity. I'm pro America. Or you could just say, yeah, that's completely me. I'm terrified of them. I see what they do.
Right, because so if someone has a stick, there's a version of this story told on Billions, right? Where you can, if you ignore the stick that I'm hitting you with, I'll keep hitting you. If you argue or whatever, I'll hit you again. And ultimately the answer is you have to take the stick away and snap it. And so sometimes the best way to take the stick away is to say, okay, sure, I'll stipulate to that. When a lawyer in a case, uh, when they know that there's about to be a lot of damning evidence that's actually true, they'll say we just stipulate to the whole thing, and all the bad stuff won't even be read into the record because you've already agreed to its existence. So now I stipulated to the whole thing, taking the sting out because in swinging that accusation at me, you're trying to hit me, and you're thinking that to hit me is to hurt me. To show you that hitting me is not hurting me leaves you with no options. So my favorite thing to do after these tactics don't work is now what? Steven, what's on your mind?
Yeah, when the doctor said preborn, it made me think of uh, pre-used vehicles, which sort of reframed used cars and lemons to pre-owned, which then raised the price of new cars in relation to that elevated price of cars. So I was thinking that word pre-born, it just increases the value of something. So I always wondered, like, if you were to needle a salesman or get into a reframe with if you're buying a car, if you could nudge them off that pre-owned word and try to get them to a concession of used or something, if one, you could reduce the cost of that vehicle. Two, and I think it's just a powerful reframe for unborn too. I think that word pre just changes the value of something when you use it.
Interesting. What do you think, Doc?
Yeah, like I said, the word pre, it indicates a process. It indicates that you're on your way to something else. The word un is just a pure negation word, so I'm not sure how that describes the unborn. That describes I mean, somebody who just died is also unborn now, I guess. It's kind of a too ambiguous, but if I say pre, that means it's before something that's going to happen. So you're right, pre-owned would have that effect on cars. It's a great way to reframe used cars.
Interesting. Shelly, I'm thinking you might be the last word of the night. What do you got, Shelly?
I apologize. The baby was crying there for a half a second, and I missed the last 15 seconds.
Oh no, we were just calling on you.
Oh, well, I was gonna say we're going back on the one thing that you were talking about. When somebody calls you a name, I I have been labeled so many different things at this point
Oh yeah.
by Republicans, Libertarians, Democrats, and everybody in between, and I just don't personally care. So when somebody calls me like an Islamophobe, I'm just like, "Yep, sure am." Or you call me a Nazi, like, "Yep, I'm whatever you want me to be." Sometimes I'll even take the stick from them and beat them back over the head with it with a funny little troll. Um, but that's me. That's how I handle things. I know I'm not a Nazi. I know I'm not an Islamophobe. I know that I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm not all these other 30,000 other labels that they've
Shelly,
thrown at
isn't
me,
that
and my
what a
friends know
Nazi
that.
would
So,
say?
but what was that, James?
Isn't that what a Nazi would say?
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, and then I was gonna ask a question, and then the only thing I would ask if you were going to try to reframe something was, how do you tell people that our money isn't actual money?
What do you mean by that?
So the Federal Reserve money that gets printed, or the money that gets printed, isn't actual, it's not backed by anything, right? So gold, it's backed by something. Our currency is just magically printed out of thin air, which is part of the reason why everything is through the roof and unaffordable. Is we just keep printing more of it. But so how do you reframe to people that the money isn't money? Because some people just kind of don't get it. It's like Monopoly almost, right? So
That's the word. That's always been the word. That you've got it. It's
Man,
built in.
I
It's
didn't.
monopoly money.
It's
It's
I
monopoly
wanted
money.
you
So,
guys to say it, not me.
well, what I was thinking too is, what do you call it when you've got like a piece of paper that you're trading around, but there's nothing actually backing it? It's called an IOU. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing behind this. So it's like, yeah, how many IOUs is this product? Because I don't have anything to back this.
How many Federal Reserve notes do I have?
Right. No, that's fascinating.
No.
When I got an account with River where I used to buy my Bitcoin, they send you this thing in the mail where it's like it's a banknote from Zimbabwe or something like that. It's like $5 billion. Point being, the money being printed out in physical form doesn't mean it has value. Large numbers on that money doesn't mean it has value, right? And so the idea being that, of course, that Bitcoin's more valuable than, any of the currency going. And so like that's how they reframe it, is to where they make it that the asset you cannot physically see and cannot physically touch seems more valuable than the fake money because there's a history of fake money out there. And what's to say we're not living it right now?
I like it.
Well, guys,
Other than
I
that,
want to thank you all for coming out. I'm going to give Doc Hypnosis the last word here. Guys, thank you so much for coming out. We're going to honor our promise and get out of here by 8. But Doc, please send us off.
Thank you so much for hosting this, James. I've had some people actually reach out after we said we were going to do this. They're like, "Can we make this a regular thing?" And I'm like, "Sounds good to me." Yeah, I
We
think the
can
more we
make this a
can,
regular thing.
the more we can kind of, give people the tools and the tool sets to keep doing this. And I tried to give you some guidelines along the way of if you want to start creating the frames, remember some, things like alliteration, ransack the thesaurus if you need to, kind of figure out what's the target behavior that I'm trying to change, what's an emotional word that will do that. One last thing on the whole question of, oh, they called me an Islamophobe or a racist or a sexist. They kind of bundle those together, right? Sometimes I just like to spit back a word that is so confusing that every time I've said it, I just see cross eyes and they're like, what? And that word is, or that phrase is, I'm a woke supremacist. And it's like, what is that? What is a woke That's two things that don't go together. You get woke, that's on one side, or you get the white supremacists on the other. But I'm a woke supremacist. And just kind of look at you and go, what is it's whatever you want it to mean. As long as we're just sticking labels on things, I would prefer that you think of me as a woke supremacist. It's a way to diffuse the entire conversation because there is no meaning to that label, and it just causes a little. I call it knocking the brain off the hamster wheel moment. So there's that.
Woke
One
supremacist
last,
is pulling out the $5 billion Zimbabwe note.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, you can't define what that is. That's okay. You can't define any of the labels you're sticking on me anyway. So it's not about that. Might as well just come up with a nuclear label that makes everybody stop the conversation and look at you twice and be like, all right, did you want to talk about the Lions instead? Because I'm game for that.
Right.
Thank you so much, though, James, for hosting this. The chapters that I mentioned in my book, Demonetize Your Mind, will help give you, I think it's chapters 10 and 11 that go through like the one word persuasion, give you some examples from how Donald Trump has done it and calling like face the nation, deface the nation, just bam, relabeled it, rebranded it. And there's a chapter 2 on just conversational framing as well. Like it's more than just a phrase. Sometimes it's more than just a label or a brand. Sometimes you get into a conversation that's been presented to you as, this is the context, this is the frame. Like when J.D. Vance did that speech at, was it OSU or OU? Anyway, the student had asked him a question about legal immigration, which is a hot topic at the time. And the kid framed it, here's the framing in the conversation, as a relationship. He's like, my girlfriend is here on a visa. We'd like to get married someday. What's your thoughts on legal immigration? And it was masterful the way Vance, that you can't beat that frame. You're dead in the water if you enter that frame and try to take it from this personal relationship aspect. Instead, he broadened the frame to talk about how many students here want to be able to get good jobs, but they won't be able to. And so he connected with the original frame, but he broadened it so much that he connected with a bunch of other people in the audience that were like, we're not even thinking about the boyfriend girlfriend's problem anymore. We're thinking about our future when I graduate. So I go through that in the book too. It's available on lulu.com, or you can hit my bio. All the links are in there. So I will land the plane there. Feel free to send me a DM, or if you come up with something later, like what about this situation? Happy to answer those questions. James, thank you so much. Let's do this again.
Thanks, everybody. God bless, and good night.